November of the Diary of Samuel Pepys, 1665. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Diary of Samuel Pepys, 1665, by Samuel Pepys. November 1665. November 1st. Lay very long in bed, discoursing with Mr. Hill of most things of a man's life, and how little merit do prevail in the world, but only favour, and that for myself, chance without merit brought me in, and that diligence only keeps me so, and will, living as I do among so many lazy people, that the diligent man becomes necessary, that they cannot do anything without him. And so told him of my late business of the victualling, and what cares I am in to keep myself having to do with people of so different factions at court, and yet must be fair with them all, which was very pleasant discourse for me to tell, as well as he seemed to take it, for him to hear. At last up, and it being a very foul day for rain, and a hideous wind, yet having promised I would go by water to Erith, and bearing sail was in danger of oversetting, but ordered them take down their sail, and so cold and wet got thither, as they had ended their dinner. However, I dined well, and after dinner all on shore, my Lord Brunker with us to Mrs. Williams' lodgings, and Sir W. Batten, Sir Edmund Pooley, and others. And there, it being my Lord's birthday, had every one a green ribbon tied in our hats very foolishly, and methinks mighty disgracefully for my Lord to have his folly so open to all the world with this woman. But by and by Sir W. Batten and I took coach, and home to Bourman, and so going home by the backside, I saw Captain Cock lighting out of his coach, having been at Erith also with her, but not on board, and so he would come along with me to my lodging, and there sat and supped and talked with us. But we were angry a little a while about our message to him the other day, about bidding him keep from the office, or his own office, because of his black dying. I owned it, and the reason of it, and would have been glad he had been out of the house, but I could not bid him go, and so supped, and after much other talk of the sad condition and state of the King's matters, we broke up, and my friend and I to bed. This night coming with Sir W. Batten into Greenwich, we called upon Colonel Clegget, who tells us for certain that the King of Denmark hath declared to stand for the King of England, but since, I hear it is wholly false. 2nd. Up, left my wife, and to the office, and there to my great content Sir W. Warren come to me, to settle the business of the Tangier boats, wherein I shall get above 100 pounds, besides 100 pounds which he gives me in the paying for them out of his own purse. He gone, I home to my lodgings to dinner, and there comes Captain Wagers, newly returned from the Straits, who puts me in great fear for our last ships that went to Tangier with provisions, that they will be taken. A brave stout fellow this captain is, and I think very honest. To the office again after dinner, and there late writing letters, and then about 8 at night set out from my office, and fitting myself at my lodgings, intended to have gone this night in a ketch down to the Fleet. But calling in my way at Sir J. Minnes's, who is come up from Erith about something about the prizes, they persuaded me not to go till the morning, it being a horrible dark and a windy night. So I back to my lodging and to bed. 3rd. Was called up about 4 o'clock, and in the dark by lantern took boat, and to the ketch and set sail, sleeping a little in the cabin till day, and then up and fell to reading of Mr. Evelyn's book about painting, which is a very pretty book. Carrying good victuals, and Tom with me, I to breakfast about 9 o'clock, and then to read again, and come to the Fleet about 12, where I found my Lord, the Prince being gone in, on board the Royal James, Sir Thomas Allen, commander, and with my Lord an hour alone discoursing what was my chief and only errand, about what was advisable for his Lordship to do in this state of things, himself being under the Duke of York's and Mr. Coventry's envy, and a great many more, and likely never to do anything honourably, but he shall be envied, and the honour taken as much as can be from it. His absence lessens his interest at court, and what is worst, we never able to set out a fleet fit for him to command, or if out, to keep them out, or fit them to do any great thing. Or if that were so, yet nobody at home minds him or his condition when he is abroad, and lastly, the whole affairs of state looking as if they would all on a sudden break in pieces, and then what a sad thing it would be for him to be out of the way. My Lord did concur in everything, and thanked me infinitely for my visit and counsel, telling me that in everything he concurs, but puts a query, what if the King will not think himself safe, if any man should go but him? How he should go off then? To that I had no answer ready, but the making the King see that he may be of as good use to him here, while another goes forth. But for that I am not able to say much. We after this talked of some other little things, and so to dinner, where my Lord infinitely kind to me, and after dinner I rose and left him with some commanders at the table taking tobacco, and I took the besom back with me, and with a brave gale in tide reached up that night to the Hope, taking great pleasure in learning the seamen's manner of singing when they sound the depths, and then to supper and to sleep, which I did most excellently all night, it being a horrible foul night for wind and rain. 4th. They sailed from midnight, and come to Greenwich about 5 o'clock in the morning. I, however, lay till about 7 or 8, and so to my office, my head a little aching, partly for want of natural rest, partly having so much business to do to-day, and partly from the news I hear that one of the little boys at my lodging is not well, and they suspect, by their sending for plaster and fume, that it may be the plague. So I sent Mr. Hayter and W. Hewer to speak with the mother, but they returned to me, satisfied that there is no hurt nor danger, but the boy is well, and offers to be searched. However, I was resolved myself to abstain coming thither for a while. Sir W. Batten and myself at the office all the morning. At noon with him to dinner at Boreman's, where Mr. Seymour with us, who is a most conceited fellow, and not over much in him. Here Sir W. Batten told us, which I had not heard before, that the last sitting day his cloak was taken from Mingo, he going home to dinner, and that he was beaten by the seamen, and swears he will come to Greenwich, but no more to the office till he can sit safe. After dinner I to the office, and there late, and much trouble to have 100 seamen all the afternoon there, swearing below, and cursing us, and breaking the glass windows, and swear they will pull the house down on Tuesday next. I sent word of this to court, but nothing will help it but money and a rope. Late at night to Mr. Glanville's, there to lie for a night or two, and to bed. 5th. Lord's Day. Up, and after being trimmed, by boat to the Cockpit, where I heard the Duke of Albemarle's chaplain make a simple sermon. Among other things, reproaching the imperfection of human learning, he cried, "All our physicians cannot tell what an ague is, and all our arithmetic is not able to number the days of a man," which, God knows, is not the fault of arithmetic, but that our understandings reach not the thing. To dinner, where a great deal of silly discourse, but the worst is, I hear that the plague increases much at Lambeth, St. Martin's, and Westminster, and fear it will all over the city. Thence I to the Swan, thinking to have seen Sarah, but she was at church, and so I by water to Deptford, and there made a visit to Mr. Evelyn, who, among other things, showed me most excellent painting in little, in distemper, Indian ink, water-colours, graving, and above all the whole secret of mezzotinto, and the manner of it, which is very pretty, and good things done with it. He read to me very much also of his discourse. He hath been many years, and now is about gardenage, which will be a most noble and pleasant piece. He read me part of a play or two of his making, very good, but not as he conceits them, I think, to be. He showed me his Hortus Hyamalis, leaves laid up in a book of several plants kept dry, which preserve colour, however, and look very finely, better than any herbal. In fine, a most excellent person he is, and must be allowed a little for a little conceitedness, but he may well be so, being a man so much above others. He read me, though with too much gusto, some little poems of his own, that were not transcendent, yet one or two very pretty epigrams, among others of a lady looking in at a grate, and being pecked at by an eagle that was there. Here comes in the middle of our discourse, Captain Cock, as drunk as a dog, but could stand, and talk, and laugh. He did so joy himself in a brave woman that he had been with all the afternoon, and who should it be but my Lady Robinson? But very troublesome he is with his noise, and talk, and laughing, though very pleasant. With him in his coach to Mr. Glanville's, where he sat with Mrs. Pennington and myself a good while, talking of this fine woman again, and then went away. Then the lady and I to very serious discourse, and among other things, of what a bonny lass my Lady Robinson is, who is reported to be kind to the prisoners, and has said to Sir G. Smith, who is her great crony, "Look, there is a pretty man. I would be content to break a commandment with him," and such loose expressions she will have often. After an hour's talk, we to bed, the lady mightily troubled about a pretty little bitch she hath, which is very sick, and will eat nothing. And the worst was, I could hear her in her chamber bemoaning the bitch, and by and by taking her into bed with her. The bitch pissed and shit a bed, and she was fain to rise, and had coals out of my chamber to dry the bed again. This night I had a letter that Sir G. Carteret would be in town tomorrow, which did much surprise me. 6th. Up into my office, where busy all the morning, and then to dinner to Captain Cox with Mr. Evelyn, where very merry, only vexed after dinner to stay too long for our coach. At last, however, to Lambeth, and thence the Cockpit, where we found Sir G. Carteret come, and in with the Duke and the East India Company about settling the business of the prizes, and they have gone through with it. Then they broke up, and Sir G. Carteret come out, and thence through the garden to the water side, and by water I with him in his boat, down with Captain Cock to his house at Greenwich. And while supper was getting ready, Sir G. Carteret and I did walk an hour in the garden before the house, talking of my Lord Sandwich's business, what enemies he hath, and how they have endeavoured to bespatter him, and particularly about his leaving of 30 ships of the enemy, when Penn would have gone, and my Lord called him back again, which is most false. However, he says, it was purposed by some hotheads in the House of Commons, at the same time when they voted a present to the Duke of York, to have voted 10,000 to the Prince, and half a crown to my Lord of Sandwich, but nothing come of it. But for all this, the King is most firm to my Lord, and so is my Lord Chancellor and my Lord Arlington. The Prince in appearance, kind. The Duke of York silent, says no hurt, but admits others to say it in his hearing. Sir W. Penn, the falsest rascal that ever was in the world, and that this afternoon the Duke of Albemarle did tell him that Penn was a very cowardly rogue, and one that hath brought all these roguish fanatic captains into the fleet, and swears he should never go out with the fleet again. That Sir W. Coventry is most kind to Penn still, and says nothing nor do anything openly to the prejudice of my Lord. He agrees with me that it is impossible for the King to set out a fleet again the next year, and that he fears all will come to ruin, there being no money in prospect but these prizes, which will bring, it may be, 20,000 but that will signify nothing in the world for it. That this late Act of Parliament for bringing the money into the Exchequer, and making of it payable out there, intended as a prejudice to him, and will be his convenience hereafter, and ruin the King's business. And so I fear it will. And do wonder Sir W. Coventry would be led by Sir G. Downing to persuade the King and Duke to have it so, before they had thoroughly weighed all circumstances. That for my Lord, the King has said to him lately that I was an excellent officer, and that my Lord Chancellor do, he thinks, love and esteem of me as well as he do of any man in England that he hath no more acquaintance with. So having done and received from me the sad news that we are like to have no money here a great while, not even of the very prizes, I set up my rest in giving up the King's service to be ruined, and so in to supper, were pretty merry, and after supper late to Mr. Glanville's, and Sir G. Carteret to bed. I also to bed, it being very late. 7th. Up and to Sir G. Carteret, and with him, he being very passionate to be gone, without staying a minute for breakfast, to the Duke of Albemarle's, and I with him by water, and with Fen. But among other things, Lord, to see how he wondered to see the river so empty of boats, nobody working at the custom-house quays, and how fearful he is, and vexed that his man, holding a wine-glass in his hand for him to drink out of, did cover his hands, it being a cold, windy, rainy morning, under the waterman's coat, though he brought the waterman from 6 or 7 miles up the river too. Nay, he carried this glass with him for his man to let him drink out of at the Duke of Albemarle's, where he intended to dine, though this he did to prevent sluttery, for the same reason he carried a napkin with him to Captain Cock's, making him believe that he should eat with foul linen. Here he with the Duke walked a good while in the park, and I with Fen, but cannot gather that he intends to stay with us, nor thinks anything at all of ever paying 1 farthing of money more to us here, let what will come of it. Thence in, and Sir W. Batten comes in by and by, and so staying till noon, and there being a great deal of company there, Sir W. Batten and I took leave of the Duke and Sir G. Carteret, there being no good to be done more for money, and so over the river and by coach to Greenwich, where at Bourman's we dined, it being late. Thence my head being full of business, and mind out of order for thinking of the effects which will arise from the want of money, I made an end of my letters by 8 o'clock, and so to my lodging, and there spent the evening till midnight talking with Mrs. Pennington, who is a very discreet, understanding lady, and very pretty discourse we had, and great variety, and she tells me with great sorrow her bitch is dead this morning, died in her bed. So broke up, and to bed. 8th. Up and to the office, where busy among other things to look my warrants for the settling of the victualling business, the warrants being come to me for the surveyors of the ports, and that for me also to be surveyor general. I did discourse largely with Tom Wilson about it, and doubt not to make it a good service to the King as well, as the King gives us very good salaries. It being a fast day, all people were at church, and the office quiet. So I did much business, and at noon adventured to my old lodging, and there eat. But am not yet well satisfied, not seeing of Christopher, though they say he is abroad. Thence after dinner to the office again, and thence am sent for to the King's Head by my Lord Rutherford, who, since I can hope for no more convenience from him, his business is troublesome to me, and therefore I did leave him as soon as I could, and by water to Deptford, and there did order my matters so, walking up and down the fields till it was dark night, that j'allais à la maison of my Valentine, and there je faisais whatever je voudrais avec her, and about 8 at night did take water, being glad I was out of the town. For the plague, it seems, rages there more than ever, and so to my lodgings, where my lord had got a supper, and the mistress of the house, and her daughters, and here stayed Mrs. Pierce to speak with me about her husband's business, and I made her sup with us. And then at night my lord and I walked with her home, and so back again. My lord and I ended all we had to say as to his business overnight, and so I took leave, and went again to Mr. Glanville's, and so to bed, it being very late. 9th. Up, and did give the servant something at Mr. Glanville's, and so took leave, meaning to lie to-night at my own lodging. To my office, where busy with Mr. Gordon running over the victualling business, and he is mightily pleased that this course is taking, and seems sensible of my favour, and promises kindness to me. At noon by water to the King's Head at Deptford, where Captain Taylor invites Sir W. Batten, Sir John Robinson, who come in with a great deal of company from hunting, and brought in a hare alive, and a great many silly stories they tell of their sport, which pleases them mightily, and me not at all, such is the different sense of pleasure in mankind, and others upon the score of a survey of his new ship. And strange to see how a good dinner and feasting reconciles everybody, Sir W. Batten and Sir J. Robinson being now as kind to him, and report well of his ship and proceedings, and promise money, and Sir W. Batten is a solicitor for him. But it is a strange thing to observe, they being the greatest enemies he had, and yet, I believe, hath in the world in their hearts. Thence after dinner stole away and to my office, where did a great deal of business till midnight, and then to Mrs. Clark's to lodge again, and going home W. Hewer did tell me my wife will be here tomorrow, and hath put away Mary, which vexes me to the heart. I cannot help it, though it may be a folly in me, and when I think seriously on it, I think my wife means no ill design in it, or if she do, I am a fool to be troubled at it, since I cannot help it. The bill of mortality to all our griefs is increased 399 this week, and the increase generally through the whole city and suburbs, which makes us all sad. 10th. Up and entered all my journals since the 28th of October, having every day's passages well in my head, though it troubles me to remember it, and which I was forced to, being kept from my lodging, where my books and papers are, for several days. So to my office, where till 2 or 3 o'clock busy, before I could go to my lodging to dinner, then did it, and to my office again. In the evening news is brought me my wife is come, so I to her, and with her spent the evening, but with no great pleasure, I being vexed about her putting away of Mary in my absence, but yet I took no notice of it at all, but fell into other discourse, and she told me, having herself been this day at my house at London, which was boldly done, to see Mary have her things, that Mr. Harrington, our neighbour, an East country merchant, is dead at Epsom of the plague, and that another neighbour of ours, Mr. Holworthy, a very able man, is also dead by a fall in the country from his horse, his foot hanging in the stirrup, and his brains beat out. Here we sat talking, and after supper to bed. 11th. I up and to the office, leaving my wife in bed, and there till noon, then to dinner, and back again to the office, my wife going to Woolwich again, and I staying very late at my office, and so home to bed. 12th. Lord's Day. Up and invited by Captain Cock to dinner. So after being ready I went to him, and there he and I and Mr. Yard, one of the Guinea Company, dined together, and very merry. After dinner I by water to the Duke of Albemarle, and there had a little discourse and business with him, chiefly to receive his commands about pilots to be got for our Hambro ships, going now at this time of the year convoy to the merchant ships, that have lain at great pain and charged some 3, some 4 months at Harwich for a convoy. They hope here the plague will be less this week. Thence back by water to Captain Cock's, and there he and I spent a great deal of the evening, as we had done of the day, reading and discoursing over part of Mr. Stillingfleet's Origine Sacrae, wherein many things are very good, and some frivolous. Thence by and by he and I to Mrs. Pennington's, but she was gone to bed. So we back and walked a while, and then to his house and to supper, and then broke up, and I home to my lodging to bed. 13th. Up into my office, where busy all the morning, and at noon to Captain Cock's to dinner, as we had appointed, in order to settle our business of accounts. But here came in an alderman, a merchant, a very merry man, and we dined, and he being gone, after dinner Cock and I walked into the garden, and there after a little discourse he did undertake under his hand to secure me in 500 pounds profit, for my share of the profit of what we have bought of the prize goods, We agreed upon the terms, which were easier on my side than I expected, and so with extraordinary inward joy we parted till the evening. So I to the office, and among other business prepared a deed for him to sign and seal to me about our agreement, which at night I got him to come and sign and seal. And so he and I to Glanville's, and there he and I sat talking and playing with Mrs. Pennington, whom we found undressed in her smock and petticoats by the fireside. And there we drank and laughed, and she willingly suffered me to put my hand in her bosom very wantonly, and keep it there long, which methought was very strange, and I looked upon myself as a man mightily deceived in a lady, for I could not have thought she could have suffered it, by her former discourse with me, so modest she seemed, and I know not what. We stayed here late, and so home, after he and I had walked till past midnight, a bright moonshine, clear cool night, before his door by the water, and so I home after 1 of the clock. 14th. Called up by break of day by Captain Cock, by agreement, and he and I in his coach through Kent Street, a sad place through the plague, people sitting sick and with plasters about them in the street begging, to Viner's and Colville's about money business, and so to my house, and there I took £300 in order to the carrying it down to my Lord Sandwich in part of the money I am to pay for Captain Cock by our agreement. So I took it down, and down I went to Greenwich to my office, and there sat busy till noon, and so home to dinner, and thence to the office again, and by and by to the Duke of Albemarle's by water late, where I find he had remembered that I had appointed to come to him this day about money, which I excused not doing sooner. But I see a dull fellow, as he is, do sometimes remember what another thinks he mindeth not. My business was about getting money of the East India Company, but, Lord, to see how the Duke himself magnifies himself in what he had done with the company, and my Lord Craven what the King could have done without my Lord Duke, and a deal of stir, but most mightily what a brave fellow I am. Back by water, it raining hard, and so to the office, and stopped my going, as I intended, to the Buoy of the Nore, and great reason I had to rejoice at it, for it proved the night of as great a storm as was almost ever remembered. Later at the office, and so home to bed. This day, calling at Mr. Rawlinson's to know how all did there, I hear that my pretty grocer's wife, Mrs. Beversham, over the way there, her husband is lately dead of the plague at Bow, which I am sorry for fear of losing her neighbourhood. 15th. Up and all the morning at the office, busy, and at noon to the King's Head Tavern, where all the Trinity House dined to-day, to choose a new master in the room of Hurlstone, that is dead, and Captain Crisp is chosen. But, Lord, to see how Sir W. Batten governs all and tramples upon Hurlstone, but I am confident the company will grow the worse for that man's death, for now Batten, and in him a lazy, corrupt, doting rogue, will have all the sway there. After dinner, who comes in but my Lady Batten, and a troop of a dozen women almost, and expected, as I found afterward, to be made mighty much of, but nobody minded them. But the best jest was, that when they saw themselves not regarded, they would go away, and it was horrible foul weather, and my Lady Batten walking through the dirty lane with new spick-and-span white shoes, she dropped one of her galoshes in the dirt where it stuck, and she forced to go home without one, at which she was horribly vexed, and I led her, and after vexing her a little more in mirth, I parted, and to Glanville's, where I knew Sir John Robinson, Sir G. Smith, and Captain Cock were gone, and there, with the company of Mrs. Pennington, whose father, I hear, was one of the Court of Justice, and died prisoner of the stone in the Tower, I made them, against their resolutions, to stay from hour to hour till it was almost midnight, and a furious, dark and rainy and windy stormy night, and which was best, I, with drinking small beer, made them all drunk drinking wine, at which Sir John Robinson made great sport. But they being gone, the lady and I very civilly sat an hour by the fireside, observing the folly of this Robinson, that makes it his work to praise himself, and all he say and do, like a heavy-headed coxcomb. The plague, blessed be God, is decreased 400, making the whole this week but 1300 and odd, for which the Lord be praised. 16th. Up and fitted myself for my journey down to the Fleet, and sending my money and boy down by water to Erith. I borrowed a horse of Mr. Boreman's son, and after having sat an hour laughing with my Lady Batten and Mrs. Turner, and eat and drank with them, I took horse and rode to Erith, where, after making a little visit to Madam Williams, who did give me information of W. Howe's having bought 8 bags of precious stones, taken from about the Dutch Vice-Admiral's neck, of which there were 8 diamonds, which cost him 60,000 sterling in India, and hoped to have made 2,000 here for them, and that this is told by one that sold him one of the bags, which hath nothing but rubies in it, which he had for 35 shillings, and that it will be proved he hath made 125 of one stone that he bought. This she desired, and I resolved I would give my Lord Sandwich notice of. So I on board my Lord Brunker, and there he and Sir Edmund Pooley carried me down into the hold of the India ship, and there did show me the greatest wealth lie in confusion that a man can see in the world, pepper scattered through every chink, you trod upon it, and in cloves and nutmegs I walked above the knees, whole rooms full, and silk in bales, and boxes of copper plate, one of which I saw opened. Having seen this, which was as noble a sight as ever I saw in my life, I away on board the other ship in despair to get the pleasure boat of the gentlemen there to carry me to the fleet. They were Mr. Ashburnham and Colonel Wyndham, but pleading the king's business, they did presently agree I should have it. So I presently on board, and got under sail, and had a good bed by the shift of Wyndham's, and so, 17th, sailed all night, and got down to Quimborough water, where all the great ships are now come, and there on board my lord, and was soon received with great content. And after some little discourse, he and I on board Sir W. Pen, and there held a council of war about many wants of the fleet, but chiefly how to get slops and victuals for the fleet now going out to convoy our Hambro ships, that have been so long detained for 4 or 5 months, for want of convoy, which we did accommodate one way or other, and so, after much chat, Sir W. Pen did give us a very good and neat dinner, and better, I think, than ever I did see at his own house at home in my life, and so was the other I eat with him. After dinner much talk, and about other things, he and I about his money for his prize goods, wherein I did give him a cool answer, but so as we did not disagree in words much, and so let that fall, and so followed my Lord Sandwich, who was gone a little before me on board the Royal James, and there spent an hour, my Lord playing upon the guitar, which he now commends above all music in the world, because it is bass enough for a single voice, and is so portable and manageable without much trouble. That being done, I got my Lord to be alone, and so I fell to acquaint him with W. Howe's business, which he had before heard a little of from Captain Cock, but made no great matter of it, but now he do, and resolves nothing less than to lay him by the heels, and seize on all he hath, saying that for this year or 2 he hath observed him so proud and conceited he could not endure him. But though I was not at all displeased with it, yet I prayed him to forbear doing anything therein, till he heard from me again about it, and I had made more inquiry into the truth of it, which he agreed to. Then we fell to public discourse, wherein was principally this. He cleared it to me beyond all doubt that Coventry is his enemy, and has been long so that I am over that, and my Lord told it me upon my proposal of a friendship between them, which he says is impossible, and methinks that my Lord's displeasure about the report in print of the first fight was not of his making, but I perceive my Lord cannot forget it, nor the other think he can. I shewed him how advisable it were upon almost any terms for him to get quite off the sea employment. He answers me again that he agrees to it, but thinks the king will not let him go off. He tells me he lacks now my Lord Orrery to solicit it for him, who is very great with the king. As an infinite secret, my Lord tells me, the factions are high between the king and the Duke, and all the court are in an uproar with their loose amours, the Duke of York being in love desperately with Mrs. Stuart. Nay, that the Duchess herself is fallen in love with her new master of the horse, one Harry Sidney, and another Harry Saville, so that God knows what will be the end of it. And that the Duke is not so obsequious as he used to be, but very high of late, and would be glad to be in the head of an army as general, and that it is said that he do propose to go and command under the King of Spain in Flanders, that his amours to Mrs. Stuart are told the king, so that all is like to be naught among them, that he knows that the Duke of York do give leave to have him spoken slightly of in his own hearing, and doth not oppose it, and told me from what time he hath observed this to begin. So that upon the whole my Lord do concur to wish with all his heart that he could with any honour get from off the employment. After he had given thanks to me for my kind visit and good counsel, on which he seems to set much by, I left him, and so away to my besom again, and there to read in a pretty French book, La Nouvelle Allégorique, upon the strife between rhetoric and its enemies, very pleasant. So after supper to sleep, and sailed all night, and came to Erith before break of day. 18th. About 9 of the clock, I went on shore, there, calling by the way only to look upon my Lord Brunker, to give Mrs. Williams an account of her matters, and so hired an ill-favoured horse, and away to Greenwich to my lodgings, where I hear how rude the soldiers have been in my absence, swearing what they would do with me, which troubled me, but, however, after eating a bit, I to the office, and there very late writing letters, and so home and to bed. 19th, Lord's Day. Up, and after being trimmed, alone by water to Erith. All the way with my song book, singing of Mr. Lawes's long recitative song in the beginning of his book. Being come there, on board my Lord Brunker, I find Captain Cock and other company, the lady not well, and mighty merry we were, Sir Edmund Pooley being very merry, and a right English gentleman, and one of the discontented cavaliers that think their loyalty is not considered. After dinner, all on shore to my Lady Williams, and there drank and talked. But, Lord, the most impertinent bold woman with my Lord that ever I did see. I did give her an account again of my business with my Lord touching W. Howe, and she did give me some more information about it, and examination taken about it, and so we parted, and I took boat, and to Woolwich, where we found my wife not well of them, and I out of humour begun to dislike her painting, the last things not pleasing me so well as the former, but I blame myself for my being so little complaisant. So without eating or drinking, there being no wine, which vexed me too, we walked with a lantern to Greenwich, and eat something at his house, and so home to bed. 20th. Up before day, and wrote some letters to go to my Lord, among others that about W. Howe, which I believe will turn him out, and so took horse for Nonsuch, with 2 men with me, and the ways very bad, and the weather worse, for wind and rain. But we got in good time thither, and I did get my tallies got ready, and thence, with as many as could go, to Ewell, and there dined very well, and I saw my Bess, a very well-favoured country lass there, and after being very merry, and having spent a piece, I took horse, and by another way met with a very good road, but it rained hard and blew, but got home very well. Here I find Mr. Deering come to trouble me about business, which I soon dispatched and parted, he telling me that Llewellyn hath been dead this fortnight of the plague, in St. Martin's Lane, which much surprised me. 21st. Up into the office, where all the morning doing business, and at noon home to dinner, and quickly back again to the office, where very busy all the evening, and late sent a long discourse to Mr. Coventry by his desire about the regulating of the method of our payment of bills in the Navy, which will be very good, though, it may be, he did aim principally at striking at Sir G. Carteret. So weary, but pleased with this business being over, I home to supper, and to bed. 22nd. Up and by water to the Duke of Albemarle, and there did some little business, but most to shew myself, and mightily I am yet in his and Lord Craven's books, and thence to the Swan, and there drank, and so down to the bridge, and so to the Change, where spoke with many people, and about a great deal of business, which kept me late. I heard this day that Mr. Harrington is not dead of the plague, as we believed, at which I was very glad, but most of all to hear that the plague is come very low, that is, the whole under 1,000, and the plague 600 and odd, and great hopes of a further decrease, because of this day's being a very exceeding hard frost, and continues freezing. This day the first of the Oxford Gazettes come out, which is very pretty, full of news, and no folly in it, wrote by Williamson. Fear that our Hambro ships at last cannot go, because of the great frost, which we believe it is there, nor are our ships cleared at the Pillow, which will keep them there too all this winter, I fear. From the Change, which is pretty full again, I to my office, and there took some things, and so by water to my lodging at Greenwich, and dined, and then to the office a while, and at night home to my lodgings, and took T. Wilson and T. Hayter with me, and there spent the evening till midnight discoursing and settling of our victualling business, that thereby I might draw up instructions for the surveyors, and that we might be doing something to earn our money. This done, I laid to bed. Among other things, it pleased me to have it demonstrated that a purser without professed cheating is a professed loser, twice as much as he gets. 23rd. Up betimes, and so being trimmed, I to get papers ready against Sir H. Cholmondeley come to me by appointment, he being newly come over from Tangier. He did by and by come, and we settled all matters about his money, and he is a most satisfied man in me, and do declare his resolution to give me 200 per annum. It continuing to be a great frost, which gives us hope for a perfect cure of the plague, he and I to walk in the park, and there discoursed with grief of the calamity of the times, how the king's service is performed, and how Tangier is governed by a man who, though honourable, yet do mind his ways of getting and little else compared, which will never make the place flourish. I brought him, and had a good dinner for him, and there come by chance Captain Cuttance, who tells me how W. Howe is laid by the heels, and confined to the Royal Catherine, and his things all seized, and how also for a quarrel, which indeed the other night my lord told me, Captain Ferrers, having cut all over the back of another of my lord's servants, is parted from my lord. I sent for little Mrs. Francis Tooker, and after they were gone I sat dallying with her an hour, doing what I would with my hands about her, and a very pretty creature it is. So in the evening to the office, where late writing letters, and at my lodging later writing for the last 12 days my journal, and so to bed. Great expectation what mischief more the French will do us, for we must fall out. We in extraordinary lack of money, and everything else, to go to sea next year. My Lord Sandwich is gone from the Fleet yesterday, toward Oxford. 24th. Up, and after doing some business at the office, I to London, and there in my way, at my old oyster shop in Gracious Street, bought 2 barrels of my fine woman of the shop, who is alive after all the plague, which now is the first observation or inquiry we make at London concerning everybody we knew before it. So to the Change, were very busy with several people, and mightily glad to see the Change so full, and hopes of another abatement still the next week. Off the Change I went home with Sir G. Smith to dinner, sending for one of my barrels of oysters, which were good, though come from Colchester, where the plague hath been so much. Here a very brave dinner, though no invitation, and Lord, to see how I am treated, that come from so mean a beginning, is matter of wonder to me. But it is God's great mercy to me, and his blessing upon my taking pains and being punctual in my dealings. After dinner, Captain Cock and I about some business, and then with my other barrel of oysters home to Greenwich, sent them my water to Mrs. Pennington, while he and I landed, and visited Mr. Evelyn, where most excellent discourse with him. Among other things, he showed me a ledger of a treasurer of the Navy, his great-grandfather, just 100 years old, which I seem mighty fond of, and he did present me with it, which I take as a great rarity, and he hopes to find me more, older than it. He also shewed us several letters of the old Lord of Leicester's in Queen Elizabeth's time, under the very handwriting of Queen Elizabeth and Queen Mary, Queen of Scots, and others, very venerable names. But, Lord, how poorly methinks they wrote in those days, and in what plain, uncut paper! Thence, Cock having sent for his coach, we to Mrs. Pennington, and there sat and talked and eat our oysters with great pleasure, and so home to my lodging late, and to bed. 25th. Up and busy at the office all day long, saving dinner time, and in the afternoon also very late at my office, and so home to bed. All our business is now about our Hambro fleet, whether it can go or no this year, the weather being set in frosty, and the whole stay being for want of pilots now, which I have wrote to the Trinity House about, but have so poor an account from them, that I did acquaint Sir W. Coventry with it this post. 26th. Lord's Day. Up, though very late a bed, yet before day, to dress myself to go toward Erith, which I would do by land, it being a horrible cold frost to go by water. So borrowed 2 horses of Mr. Howell and his friend, and with much ado set out after my horses being frosted, which I know not what it means to this day, and my boy having lost one of my spurs and stockings, carrying them to the smith's. But I borrowed a stocking, and so got up, and Mr. took her with me, and rode to Erith. And there on board my Lord Brunker met Sir W. Warren upon his business, among others, and did a great deal, Sir J. Minnes, as God would have it, not being there to hinder us with his impertinences. Business done, we to dinner very merry. There being there Sir Edmund Pooley, a very worthy gentleman. They are now come to the copper boxes in the prizes, and hope to have ended all this week. After dinner took leave, and on shore to Madam Williams, to give her an account of my Lord's letter to me about Howe, who he has clapped by the heels on suspicion of having the jewels, and she did give me my Lord Brunker's examination of the fellow, that declares his having them. And so away, Sir W. Warren riding with me, and the way being very bad, that is, hard and slippery by reason of the frost, so we could not come to pass Woolwich till night. However, having a great mind to have gone to the Duke of Albemarle, I endeavoured to have gone further, but the night come on, and no going, so I light and sent my horse by Tooker, and returned on foot to my wife at Woolwich, where I found, as I had directed, a good dinner to be made against tomorrow, and invited guests in the yard, meaning to be merry, in order to her taking leave, for she intends to come in a day or 2 to me for altogether. But here, they tell me, one of the houses behind them is infected, and I was fain to stand there a great while to have their back door opened, but they could not, having locked them fast, against any passing through. So was forced to pass by them again, close to their sick beds, which they were removing out of the house, which troubled me. So I made them uninvite their guests, and to resolve of coming all away to me tomorrow. And I walked with a lantern, weary as I was, to Greenwich. But it was a fine walk, it being a hard frost, and so to Captain Cox. But he, I found, had sent for me to come to him to Mrs. Pennington's, and there I went, and we were very merry, and supped, and Cock being sleepy, he went away betimes. I stayed alone, talking and playing with her till past midnight, she suffering me whatever ego voulait avec ses mamilles. Much pleased with her company, we parted, and I home to bed at past 1, all people being in bed, thinking I would have stayed out of town all night. 27th. Up, and being to go to wait on the Duke of Albemarle, who is to go out of town to Oxford tomorrow, and I being unwilling to go by water, it being bitter cold, walked it with my landlady's little boy Christopher to Lambeth, it being a very fine walk, and calling at half the way, and drank. And so to the Duke of Albemarle, who is visited by everybody against his going, and mighty kind to me, and upon my desiring his Grace to give me his kind word to the Duke of York, if any occasion there were of speaking of me, he told me he had reason to do so, for there had been nothing done in the navy without me. His going, I hear, is upon putting the sea business into order, and, as some say, and people of his own family, that he is agog to go to sea himself the next year. Here I met with a letter from Sir G. Carteret, who is come to Cranbourne, that he will be here this afternoon, and desires me to be with him. So the Duke would have me dine with him. So it being not dinner time, I to the Swan, and there found Sarah all alone in the house. So away to the Duke of Albemarle again, and there to dinner, he most exceeding kind to me, to the observation of all that are there. At dinner comes Sir G. Carteret and dines with us. After dinner a great deal alone with Sir G. Carteret, who tells me that my lord hath received still worse and worse usage from some base people about the court. But the king is very kind, and the Duke do not appear the contrary, and my Lord Chancellor swore to him, by I will not forsake my Lord of Sandwich. Our next discourse is upon this Act for money, about which Sir G. Carteret comes to see what money can be got upon it. But none can be got, which pleases him the thoughts of, for, if the Exchequer should succeed in this, his office would fail. But I am apt to think, at this time of hurry, and plague, and want of trade, no money will be got upon a new way which few understand. We walked, Cock and I, through the park with him, and so we being to meet the Vice-Chamberlain tomorrow at Nonsuch, to treat with Sir Robert Long about the same business, I into London, it being dark night, by a hackney coach, the first I have durst to go in many a day, and with great pain now for fear. But it being unsafe to go by water in the dark and frosty cold, and unable being weary with my morning walk to go on foot, this was my only way. Few people yet in the streets, nor shops open, here and there 20 in a place almost, though not above 5 or 6 o'clock at night. So to Viner's, and there heard of Cock, and found him at the Pope's Head, drinking with Temple. I to them, where the goldsmiths do decry the new Act, for money to be all brought into the Exchequer and paid out thence, saying they will not advance 1 farthing upon it, and indeed it is their interest to say, and do so. Thence Cock and I to Sir G. Smith's, it being now night, and there up to his chamber, and sat talking, and I barbing, against tomorrow, and anon at 9 at night, comes to us Sir G. Smith and the Lieutenant of the Tower. And there they sat, talking and drinking till past midnight, and mighty merry we were, the Lieutenant of the Tower being in a mighty vein of singing, and he hath a very good ear and strong voice, but no manner of skill. Sir G. Smith shewed me his lady's closet, which was very fine, and after being very merry, here I lay in a noble chamber, and mighty highly treated, the first time I have lain in London a long time. 28th. Up before day, and Cock and I took a hackney coach appointed with 4 horses to take us up, and so carried us over London Bridge. But there, thinking of some business, I did light at the foot of the bridge, and by help of a candle at a stall, where some payers were at work, I wrote a letter to Mr. Hayter, and never knew so great an instance of the usefulness of carrying pen and ink and wax about one. So we, the way being very bad, to Nonsuch, and thence to Sir Robert Long's house, a fine place, and dinner time ere we got thither. But we had breakfasted a little at Mr. Gordon's, he being out of town though, and there borrowed Dr. Taylor's Sermons, and is a most excellent book, and worth my buying, where had a very good dinner, and curiously dressed. And here a couple of ladies, kinswomen of his, not handsome though, but rich, that knew me by report of Theo Turner, and mighty merry we were. After dinner, to talk of our business, the Act of Parliament, where, in short, I see Sir R. Long mighty fierce in the great good qualities of it. But in that and many other things he was stiff in, I think without much judgment, or the judgment I expected from him, and already they have evaded the necessity of bringing people into the Exchequer with their bills to be paid there. Sir G. Carteret is titched at this, yet resolves with me to make the best use we can of this Act for the King, but all our care, we think, will not render it as it should be. He did again here alone discourse with me about my lord, and is himself strongly for my lord's not going to sea, which I am glad to hear, and did confirm him in it. He tells me too that he talked last night with the Duke of Albemarle about my Lord Sandwich, by the by making him sensible that it is his interest to preserve his old friends, which he confessed he had reason to do. For he knows that ill officers were doing of him, and that he honoured my Lord Sandwich with all his heart. After this discourse we parted, and all of us broke up, and we parted. Captain Cock and I through Wandsworth, drank at Sir Allan Broderick's, a great friend and comrade of Cock's, whom he values above the world for a witty companion, and I believe he is so. So to Vauxhall, and there took boat, and down to the Old Swan, and thence to Lombard Street, it being dark night, and thence to the Tower. Took boat, and down to Greenwich, Cock and I, he home, and I to the office, where did a little business, and then to my lodgings, where my wife is come. And I am well pleased with it, only much trouble in those lodgings we have, the mistress of the house being so deadly dear in everything we have, so that we do resolve to remove home soon as we know how the plague goes this week, which we hope will be a good decrease. So to bed. 29th. Up, my wife and I talking how to dispose of our goods, and resolved upon sending our two maids, Alice, who has been a day or two at Woolwich with my wife, thinking to have had a feast there, and Susan, home. So my wife after dinner did take them to London with some goods, and I in the afternoon, after doing other business, did go also by agreement to meet Captain Cock, and from him to Sir Roger Cotton's, about the money due from Cock to him for the late prize goods, wherein Sir Roger is troubled that he hath not payment as agreed, and the other that he must pay without being secured in the quiet possession of them, but some accommodation to both, I think, will be found. But Cock did tell me that several have begged so much of the King to be discovered out of stolen prize goods, and so I am afeard we shall hereafter have trouble. Therefore I will get myself free of them as soon as I can, and my money paid. Thence home to my house, calling my wife, where the poor wretch is putting things in a way to be ready for our coming home, and so by water together to Greenwich, and so spent the night together. 30th. Up and at the office all the morning. At noon comes Sir Thomas Allen, and I made him dine with me, and very friendly he is, and a good man, I think, but one that professes he loves to get and to save. He dined with my wife and me and Mrs. Barbary, whom my wife brings along with her from Woolwich for as long as she stays here. In the afternoon to the office, and there very late writing letters, and then home, my wife and people sitting up for me, and after supper to bed. Great joy we have this week in the weekly bill, it being come to 544 in all, and but 333 of the plague, so that we are encouraged to get to London soon as we can. And my father writes as great news of joy to them that he saw York's waggon go again this week to London, and was full of passengers, and tells me that my Aunt Bell hath been dead of the plague these 7 weeks. End of November. December of the Diary of Samuel Pepys, 1665. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Diary of Samuel Pepys, 1665, by Samuel Pepys. December, 1665. December 1st. This morning to the office, full of resolution to spend the whole day at business, and there, among other things, I did agree with Pointer to be my clerk for my victualling business, and so all alone all the day long, shut up in my little closet at my office, drawing up instructions, which I should long since have done for my surveyors of the ports, Sir W. Coventry desiring much to have them, and he might well have expected them long since. After dinner to it again, and at night had long discourse with Gibson, who is for Yarmouth, who makes me understand so much of the victualling business and the purser's trade, that I am ashamed I should go about the concerning myself in a business which I understand so very, very little of, and made me distrust all I had been doing to-day. So I did lay it by till to-morrow morning to think of it afresh, and so home by promise to my wife to have mirth there. So we had our neighbours, little Miss Tooker and Mrs. Daniels, to dance, and after supper I to bed, and left them merry below, which they did not part from till 2 or 3 in the morning. 2nd. Up and discoursing with my wife, who is resolved to go to London for good and all this day, we did agree upon giving Mr. Sheldon 10 and Mrs. Barbary 2 pieces, and so I left her to go down thither, to fetch away the rest of the things, and pay him the money. And so I to the office. We are very busy setting Mr. Pointer to write out my last night's work, which pleases me this day, but yet it is pretty to reflect how much I am out of confidence with what I had done upon Gibson's discourse with me, for fear I should have done it sillily. But Pointer likes them, and Mr. Hayter also, but yet I am afeard lest they should do it out of flattery, so conscious I am of my ignorance. Dined with my wife at noon, and took leave of her, she being to go to London, as I said, for all together, and I to the office, busy till past 1 in the morning. 3rd. It being Lord's Day, up and dressed, and to church, thinking to have sat with Sir James Bunce to hear his daughter and her husband sing, that are so much commended, but was prevented by being invited into Colonel Clegget's pew. However, there I sat near Mr. Lanier, with whom I spoke, and in sight by chance, and very near my fat brown beauty of our parish, the rich merchant's lady, a very noble woman, and Madam Pierce. A good sermon of Mr. Plume's, and so to Captain Cock's, and there dined with him, and Colonel Wyndham, a worthy gentleman, whose wife was nurse to the present king, and one that while she lived governed him and everything else, as Cock says, as a minister of state, the old king putting mighty weight and trust upon her. They talk much of matters of state and persons, and particularly how my Lord Berkeley hath all along been a fortunate, though a passionate and but weak man as to policy, but as a kinsman brought in and promoted by my Lord of St. Albans, and one that is the greatest vapourer in the world, this Colonel Wyndham says, and one to whom only, with Jack Ashburnell and Colonel Legge, the king's removal to the Isle of Wight from Hampton Court was communicated, and, though betrayed by their knavery, or at best by their ignorance, insomuch that they have all solemnly charged one another with their failures therein, and have been at daggers drawing publicly about it, yet now none greater friends in the world. We dined, and in comes Mrs. Owen, a kinswoman of my Lord Brunker's, about getting a man discharged, which I did for her, and by Mrs. Pierce to speak with me, and Mary, my wife's late maid, now gone to her, about her husband's business of money. And she tells us how she prevented Captain Fisher the other day in his purchase of all her husband's fine goods, as pearls and silks, that he had seized in an apothecary's house, a friend of theirs, but she got in and broke them open, and removed all before Captain Fisher came the next day to fetch them away, at which he is stark mad. She went home, and I to my lodgings. At night, by agreement, I fetched her again with Cock's coach, and he come, and we sat and talked together, thinking to have had Mrs. Coleman and my songsters, her husband and Lanier, but they failed me. So we to supper, and as merry as was sufficient, and my pretty little miss with me, and so after supper walked with Pierce home, and so back and to bed. But, Lord, I stand admiring of the wittiness of her little boy, which is one of the wittiest boys, but most confident that ever I did see of a child of 9 years old or under in all my life, or indeed one twice his age almost, but all for roguish wit. So to bed. 4th. Several people to me about business, among others Captain Taylor, intended storekeeper for Harwich, whom I did give some assistance in his dispatch by lending him money. So out and by water to London and to the Change, and up and down about several businesses, and after the observing, God forgive me, 1 or 2 of my neighbour Jason's women come to town, which did please me very well, home to my house at the office, where my wife had got a dinner for me, and it was a joyful thing for us to meet here, for which God be praised. Here was her brother come to see her and speak with me about business. It seems my recommending of him hath not only obtained his presently being admitted into the Duke of Albemarle's guards, and present pay, but also by the Duke's and Sir Philip Howard's direction, to be put as a right-hand man, and other marks of special respect, at which I am very glad, partly for him, and partly to see that I am reckoned something in my recommendations, but wish he may carry himself that I may receive no disgrace by him. So to the Change. Up and down again in the evening about business, and to meet Captain Cock, who waited for Mrs. Pierce, with whom he is mightily stricken, to receive and hide for her rich goods she saved the other day from seizure. Upon the Change to-day, Colville tells me, from Oxford, that the King in person hath justified my Lord Sandwich to the highest degree, and is right in his favour to the uttermost. So lay by water home, taking a barrel of oysters with me, and at Greenwich went and sat with Madam Pennington, and made her undress her head and sit dishevelled all night, sporting till 2 in the morning, and so away to my lodging, and so to bed. Over-fasting all the morning hath filled me mightily with wind, and nothing else hath done it, that I fear a fit of the colic. 5th. Up and to the office, where very busy about several businesses all the morning. At noon empty, yet without stomach to dinner, having spoiled myself with fasting yesterday, and so filled with wind. In the afternoon by water, calling Mr. Stevens, who is with great trouble paying of seamen of their tickets at Deptford, and to London, to look for Captain Kingdom, whom we found at home about 5 o'clock. I tried him, and he promised to follow us presently to the East India House to sign papers to-night, in order to the settling the business of my receiving money for Tangier. We went and stopped the officer there to shut up. He made us stay above an hour. I sent for him, he comes, but was not found at home, but abroad on other business, and brings a paper saying that he had been this hour looking for the Lord Ashley's order. When he looks for it, that is not the paper. He would go again to look, kept us waiting till almost 8 at night. Then was I to go home by water this weather and dark, and to write letters by the post, besides keeping the East India officers there so late. I sent for him again. At last he comes, and says he cannot find the paper, which is a pretty thing to lay orders for 100,000 pounds, no better. I was angry. He told me I ought to give people ease at night, and all business was to be done by day. I answered him sharply that I did not make, nor any honest man, any difference between night and day in the king's business, and this was such, and my Lord Ashley should know. He answered me short. I told him I knew the time, meaning the rump's time, when he did other men's business with more diligence. He cried, "Nay, say not so," and stopped his mouth, not one word after. We then did our business without the order, in less than 8 minutes, which he made me to no purpose stay above 2 hours for the doing. This made him mad, and so we exchanged notes, and I had notes for 14,000 pounds of the treasure of the company, and so away and by water to Greenwich, and wrote my letters, and so home late to bed. 6th. Up betimes, it being fast day, and by water to the Duke of Albemarle, who come to town from Oxford last night. He is mighty brisk, and very kind to me, and asks my advice principally in everything. He surprises me with the news that my Lord Sandwich goes ambassador to Spain speedily, though I know not whence this arises, yet I am heartily glad of it. He did give me several directions what to do, and so I home by water again, and to church a little, thinking to have met Mrs. Pierce in order to our meeting at night, but she not there, I home and dined, and comes presently by appointment my wife. I spent the afternoon upon a song of Solomon's words to Roxalana that I have set, and so with my wife walked and Mercer to Mrs. Pierce's, where Captain Rolt and Mrs. Nip, Mr. Coleman and his wife, and Lanier, Mrs. Worship and her singing daughter met. And by unexpectedly comes Mr. Pierce from Oxford. Here the best company for music I ever was in my life, and wish I could live and die in it, both for music and the face of Mrs. Pierce, and my wife and Nip, who is pretty enough, but the most excellent mad-humoured thing, and sings the noblest that ever I heard in my life, and Rolt with her, some things together most excellently. I spent the night in ecstasy almost, and having invited them to my house a day or two hence, we broke up, Pierce having told me that he is told how the king hath done my Lord Sandwich all the right imaginable, by shewing him his countenance before all the world on every occasion, to remove thoughts of discontent, and that he is to go ambassador, and that the Duke of York is made general of all forces by land and sea, and the Duke of Albemarle lieutenant general. Whether the two latter alterations be so, true or no, he knows not, but he is told so, but my Lord is in full favour with the king. So all home and to bed. 7th. Up and to the office, where very busy all day. Sir G. Carteret's letter tells me my Lord Sandwich is, as I was told, declared ambassador extraordinary to Spain, and to go with all speed away, and that his enemies have done him as much good as he could wish. At noon late to dinner, and after dinner spent till night with Mr. Gibson and Hayter, discoursing and making myself more fully know the trade of pursers, and what fit is to be done in their business, and so to the office till midnight writing letters, and so home, and after supper with my wife about 1 o'clock, to bed. 8th. Up, well pleased in my mind about my Lord Sandwich, about whom I shall know more anon from Sir G. Carteret, who will be in town, and also that the Hamborough ships, after all difficulties, are got out. God send them good speed. So, after being trimmed, I by water to London, to the Navy Office, there to give order to my maid to buy things to send down to Greenwich for supper to-night, and I also to buy other things, as oysters and lemons, 6d. per piece, and oranges, 3d. That done, I to the Change, and among many other things, especially forgetting of my Tangier money, I by appointment met Mr. Gordon, and he and I to the Pope's Head Tavern, and there he did give me alone a very pretty dinner. Our business to talk of his matters and his supply of money, which was necessary for us to talk on before the Duke of Albemarle this afternoon, and Sir G. Carteret. After that I offered now to pay him the 4,000 pounds remaining of his 8,000 pounds for Tangier, which he took with great kindness, and prayed me most frankly to give him a note for 3,500 pounds, and accept the other 500 pounds for myself, which in good earnest was against my judgment to do, for I expected about 100 pounds and no more. But, however, he would have me do it, and owns very great obligations to me, and the man indeed I love, and he deserves it. This put me into great joy, though with a little stay to it till we have time to settle it, for so great a sum I was fearful any accident might by death or otherwise defeat me, having not now time to change papers. So we rose, and by water to Whitehall, where we found Sir G. Carteret with the Duke, and also Sir G. Downing, whom I had not seen in many years before. He greeted me very kindly, and I him, though methinks I am touched, that it should be said that he was my master heretofore, as doubtless he will. So to talk of our navy business, and particularly money business, of which there is little hopes of any present supply upon this new Act, the goldsmiths being here, and Alderman Backwell nearly come from Flanders, and none offering any. So we rose without doing more than my stating the case of the victualler, that whereas there is due to him on the last year's declaration £80,000, and the charge of this year's amounts to £420,000 and odd, he must be supplied between this and the end of January with £150,000, and the remainder in 40 weeks by weekly payments, or else he cannot go through his business. Thence, after some discourse with Sir G. Carteret, who, though he tells me that he is glad of my lord's being made ambassador, and that it is the greatest courtesy his enemies could do him, yet I find he is not heartily merry upon it, and that it was no design of my lord's friends, but the prevalence of his enemies, and that the Duke of Albemarle and Prince Rupert are like to go to sea together the next year. I pray God, when my lord is gone, they do not fall hard upon the Vice-Chamberlain, being alone, and in so envious a place, though by this late act, and the instructions now a brewing for our office, as to method of payments, will destroy the profit of his place of itself without more trouble. Thence by water down to Greenwich, and there found all my company come, that is, Mrs. Nip, and an ill, melancholy, jealous-looking fellow, her husband, that spoke not a word to us all the night, Pierce and his wife, and Rolt, Mrs. Worship and her daughter, Coleman and his wife, and Lanier. And to make us perfectly happy, there comes by chance to town Mr. Hill to see us. Most excellent music we had in abundance, and a good supper, dancing, and a pleasant scene of Mrs. Nip's rising sick from table, but whispered me it was for some hard word or other her husband gave her just now when she laughed, and was more merry than ordinary. But we got her in humour again, and mighty merry, spending the night till 2 in the morning with most complete content as ever in my life, it being increased by my day's work with Gordon. Then broke up, and we to bed, Mr. Hill and I, whom I love more and more, and he us. 9th. Called up betimes by my Lord Brunker, who is come to town from his long water work at Erith last night, to go with him to the Duke of Albemarle, which by his coach I did. Our discourse upon the ill posture of the times through lack of money. At the Duke's did some business, and I believe he was not pleased to see all the Duke's discourse and applications to me and everybody else. Discoursed also with Sir G. Carteret about office business, but no money in view. Here my lord and I stayed and dined, the Vice-Chamberlain taking his leave. At table the Duchess, a damned ill-looked woman, complaining of her lord's going to sea the next year, said these cursed words: "If my lord had been a coward, he had gone to sea no more. It may be then he might have been excused and made an ambassador," meaning my Lord Sandwich. This made me mad, and I believe she perceived my countenance change, and blushed herself very much. I was in hopes others had not minded it, but my Lord Brunker, after we were come away, took notice of the words to me with displeasure. Thence after dinner away by water, calling and taking leave of Sir G. Carteret, whom we found going through at Whitehall, and so over to Lambeth and took coach and home, and so to the office, where late writing letters, and then home to Mr. Hill, and sang, among other things, my song of Beauty Retire, which he likes, only excepts against 2 notes in the bass, but likes the whole very well. So late to bed. 10th. Lord's Day. Lay long talking, Hill and I, with great pleasure, and then up, and being ready, walked to Cox for some news, but heard none, only they would have us stay their dinner, and sent for my wife, who come, and very merry we were, there being Sir Edmund Pooley and Mr. Evelyn. Before we had dined comes Mr. Andrews, whom we had sent for to Bow, and so after dinner home, and there we sang some things, but not with much pleasure, Mr. Andrews being in so great haste to go home, his wife looking every hour to be brought to bed. He gone, Mr. Hill and I continued our music, one thing after another, late till supper, and so to bed with great pleasure. 11th. Lay long, with great pleasure, talking. So I left him, and to London to the Change, and after discourse with several people about business, met Mr. Gordon at the Pope's Head, where he brought Mr. Lewis and T. Wilson to discourse about the victualling business, and the alterations of the purser's trade, for something must be done to secure the king a little better, and yet that they may have wherewith to live. After dinner I took him aside, and perfected to my great joy my business with him, wherein he deals most nobly, in giving me his hand for the £4,000, and would take my note but for £3,500. This is a great blessing, and God make me thankful truly for it. With him till it was dark, putting in writing our discourse about victualling, and so parted, and I to Viners. and there evened all accounts, and took up my note, setting all straight between us to this day. The like to Colville, and paying several bills due from me on the Tangier account. Then late met Cock and Temple at the Pope's Head, and there had good discourse with Temple, who tells me that of the 80,000 advanced already by the East India Company, they have had 5,000 out of their hands. He discoursed largely of the quantity of money coined, and what may be thought the real sum of money in the kingdom. He told me too, as an instance of the thrift used in the king's business, that the tools and the interest of the money using to the king for the money he borrowed, while the new invention of the mill money was perfected, cost him 35,000, and in mirth tells me that the new fashion money is good for nothing but to help the prince. If he can secretly get copper plate shut up in silver, it shall never be discovered, at least not in his age. Thence Cock and I by water, he home and I home, and there sat with Mr. Hill and my wife, supping, talking, and singing till midnight, and then to bed. That I may remember it the more particularly, I thought fit to insert this additional memorandum of Temple's discourse this night with me, which I took in writing from his mouth. Before the Harp and Cross money was cried down, he and his fellow goldsmiths did make some particular trials what proportion that money bore to the old king's money, and they found that generally it come to, one with another, about 25 in every 100 Of this money there was, upon the calling of it in, 650,000 at least brought into the Tower, and from thence he computes that the whole money of England must be full 6,250,000. But for all this believes that there is above 30 million pounds, he supposing that about the king's coming in, when he begun to observe the quantity of the new money, people begun to be fearful of this money's being cried down, and so picked it out and set it a-going as fast as they could to be rid of it. And he thinks 30 million pounds the rather, because if there were but 16,250,000, the king having 2 million pounds every year, would have the whole money of the kingdom in his hands in 8 years. He tells me about 350,000 sterling was coined out of the French money, the proceeds of Dunkirk, so that, with what was coined of the cross money, there is new coined about £1 million besides the gold, which is guessed at 500,000. He tells me that, though the king did deposit the French money in pawn all the while, for the 350,000 he was forced to borrow thereupon, till the tools could be made for the new minting in the present form, yet the interest he paid for that time came to 35,000, Viner having to his knowledge 10,000 for the use of 100,000 of it. 12th. Up and to the office, where my Lord Brunker met, and among other things did finish a contract with Cock for hemp, by which I hope to get my money due from him paid presently. At noon home to dinner, only eating a bit, and with much kindness taking leave of Mr. Hill, who goes away to-day. And so I by water, saving the tide through bridge, and to Sir G. Downing by appointment at Charing Cross, who did at first mightily please me with informing me thoroughly the virtue and force of this act. And indeed it is 10 times better than ever I thought could have been said of it. But when he comes to impose upon me that without more ado I must get by my credit people to serve in goods and lend money upon it, and none could do it better than I, and the king should give me thanks particularly in it, and I could not get him to excuse me, but I must come to him, though to no purpose on Saturday, and that he is sure I will bring him some bargains or other made upon this act, it vexed me more than all the pleasure I took before, for I find he will be troublesome to me in it, if I will let him have as much of my time as he would have. So late I took leave, and in the cold, the weather setting in cold, home to the office, and, after my letters being wrote, home to supper and to bed, my wife being also gone to London. 13th. Up betimes and finished my journal for 5 days back, and then, after being ready, to my Lord Brunker by appointment, there to order the disposing of some money that we have come into the office, and here to my great content I did get a bill of imprest to Captain Cock, to pay myself in part of what is coming to me from him, for my Lord Sandwich's satisfaction and my own, and also another payment or two wherein I am concerned, and having done that, did go to Mr. Pierce's, where he and his wife made me drink some tea, and so he and I by water together to London. Here at a tavern in Cornhill, he and I did agree upon my delivering up to him a bill of Captain Cock's, put into my hand for Pierce's use upon evening of reckonings about the prize goods, and so away to the Change, and there hear the ill news, to my great and all our great trouble, that the plague is increased again this week, notwithstanding there hath been a day or two great frosts. But we hope it is only the effects of the late close warm weather, and if the frost continue the next week, may fall again. But the town do thicken so much with people, that it is much if the plague do not grow again upon us. Off the change, invited by Sheriff Hooker, who keeps the poorest, mean, dirty table in a dirty house that ever I did see any sheriff of London, and a plain, ordinary, silly man I think he is, but rich. Only his son, Mr. Lethulia, I like, for a pretty, civil, understanding merchant, and the more by much because he happens to be husband to our noble, fat, brave lady in our parish, that I and my wife admire so. Thence away to the Pope's Head Tavern, and there met first with Captain Cock, and dispatched my business with him to my content, he being ready to sign his bill of imprest of 2,000 and gives it me in part of his payment to me, which glads my heart. He being gone, comes Sir W. Warren, who advised with me about several things about getting money, and 100 I shall presently have of him. We advised about a business of insurance, wherein something may be saved to him and got to me, and to that end he and I did take a coach at night, and to the Cockpit, there to get the Duke of Albemarle's advice for our insuring some of our sound goods coming home under Harman's convoy. But he proved shy of doing it without knowledge of the Duke of York. So we back again, and calling at my house to see my wife, who is well, though my great trouble is that our poor little parish is the greatest number this week in all the city within the walls, having 6, from 1 the last week. And so by water to Greenwich, leaving Sir W. Warren at home, and I straight to my Lord Brunker, it being late, and concluded upon insuring something, and to send to that purpose to Sir W. Warren to come to us tomorrow morning. So I home, and my mind in great rest, to bed. 14th. Up and to the office a while with my Lord Brunker, where we directed Sir W. Warren in the business of the insurance, as I desired, and ended some other businesses of his. And so at noon I to London, but the change was done before I got thither. So I to the Pope's Head Tavern, and there find Mr. Gordon and Captain Beckford and Nick Osborne going to dinner. And I dined with them, and very exceeding merry we were, as I had not been a great while. And dinner being done, I to the East India House, and there had an assignment on Mr. Temple for the 2,000 of Cox, which joyed my heart. So, having seen my wife in the way, I home by water, and to write my letters, and then home to bed. 15th. Up, and spent all the morning with my surveyors of the ports for the victualling, and there read to them what instructions I had provided for them, and discoursed largely much of our business and the business of the pursers. I left them to dine with my people, and to my Lord Brunker's, where I met with a great good dinner, and Sir T. Teddyman, with whom my Lord and I were to discourse about the bringing of W. Howe to a trial for his jewels, and there till almost night, and so away toward the office, and in my way met with Sir James Bunce. And after asking what news, he cried, "Ah," says he, I know not whether in earnest or jest, "this is the time for you," says he, "that were for Oliver heretofore. You are full of employment, and we poor cavaliers sit still and can get nothing," which was a pretty reproach, I thought, but answered nothing to it, for fear of making it worse. So away, and I to see Mrs. Pennington, but company being to come to her, I stayed not, but to the office a little, and so home, and after supper to bed. 16th. Up and met at the office, Sir W. Batten with us, who come from Portsmouth on Monday last, and hath not been with us to see or discourse with us about any business till this day. At noon to dinner, Sir W. Warren with me on boat, and thence I by water, it being a fearful, cold, snowing day, to Westminster, to Whitehall stairs, and thence to Sir G. Downing, to whom I brought the happy news of my having contracted, as we did this day with Sir W. Warren, for a ship's lading of Norway goods here, and another at Harwich, to the value of above 3,000, which is the first that hath been got upon the new Act, and he is overjoyed with it, and tells me he will do me all the right to court about it in the world, and I am glad I have it to write to Sir W. Coventry to-night. He would fain have me come in 200 to lend upon the Act, but I desire to be excused in doing that, it being to little purpose for us that relate to the King to do it, for the sum gets the King no courtesy nor credit. So I parted from him and walked to Westminster Hall, where Sir W. Warren, who come along with me, stayed for me, and there I did see Betty Howlet come after the sickness to the hall. Had not opportunity to salute her, as I desired, but was glad to see her, and a very pretty wench she is. Thence back, landing at the Old Swan, and taking boat again at Billingsgate, and setting ashore, we home, and I to the office, and there wrote my letters, and so home to supper and to bed, it being a great frost. News is come to-day of our sound fleet being come, but I do not know what Sir W. Warren hath insured. 17th, Lord's Day. After being trimmed, word brought me that Cutler's coach is by appointment come to the Isle of Dogs for me, and so I over the water, and in his coach to Hackney, a very fine, cold, clear, frosty day. At his house I find him with a plain little dinner, good wine, and welcome. He is still a prating man, and the more I know him, the less I find in him. A pretty house he hath here indeed, of his own building. His old mother was an object at dinner that made me not like it, and after dinner, to visit his sick wife, I did not also take much joy in. But very friendly he is to me, not for any kindness I think he hath to any man, but thinking me, I perceive, a man whose friendship is to be looked after. After dinner, back again into Deptford to Mr. Evelyn's, who was not within. But I had appointed my cousin Thomas Pepys of Hatcham to meet me there, to discourse about getting his £1,000 of my Lord Sandwich, having now an opportunity of my having above that sum in my hands of his. I found this a dull fellow still in all his discourse, but in this he is ready enough to embrace what I counsel him to, which is, to write importunately to my Lord and me about it, and I will look after it. I do again and again declare myself a man unfit to be security for such a sum. He walked with me as far as Deptford upper town, being mighty respectful to me, and there parted. He telling me that this town is still very bad of the plague. I walked to Greenwich first, to make a short visit to my Lord Brunker, and next to Mrs. Pennington, and spent all the evening with her, with the same freedom I used to have, and very pleasant company. With her till 1 of the clock in the morning, and past, and so to my lodging to bed. And 18th. Betimes up, it being a fine frost, and walked it to Redriff, calling and drinking at halfway house, thinking, indeed, to have overtaken some of the people of our house, the women, who were to walk the same walk, but I could not. So to London, and there visited my wife, and was a little displeased to find she is so forward all of a spurt to make much of her brother and sister since my last kindness to him in getting him a place. But all ended well presently, and I to the Change, and up and down to Kingdon, and the goldsmiths, to meet Mr. Stevens, and did get all my money matters most excellently cleared to my complete satisfaction. Passing over Cornhill, I spied young Mrs. Daniel and Sarah, my landlady's daughter, who are come, as I expected, to town, and did say they spied me, and I dogged them to St. Martin's, where I passed by them, being shy, and walked down as low as Duck Lane, and inquired for some Spanish books, and so back again, and they were gone. So to the Change, hoping to see them in the street, and missing them, went back again thither, and back to the Change, but no sight of them, so went after my business again, and though late, was sent to by Sir W. Warren, who heard where I was, to entreat me to come dine with him, hearing that I lacked a dinner, at the Pope's Head, and there with Mr. Hinton the goldsmith, and others, very merry. But, Lord, to see how Dr. Hinton come in with a gallant or two from court, and do so call cousin Mr. Hinton the goldsmith, but I that know him to be a beggar and a knave, did make great sport in my mind at it. After dinner, Sir W. Warren and I, alone in another room a little while, talking about business, and so parted, and I hence, my mind full of content in my day's work, home by water to Greenwich, the river beginning to be very full of ice, so as I was a little frighted, but got home well, it being dark. So having no mind to do any business, went home to my lodgings, and there got little Mrs. Tooker, and Mrs. Daniel, the daughter, and Sarah, to my chamber, to cards, and sup with me. When in comes Mr. Pierce to me, who tells me how W. Howe has been examined on shipboard by my Lord Brunker to-day, and others, and that he has charged him out of envy with sending goods under my Lord's seal, and in my Lord Brunker's name, thereby to get them safe passage, which, he tells me, is false, but that he did use my name to that purpose, and hath acknowledged it to my Lord Brunker, but do also confess to me that one parcel he thinks he did use my Lord Brunker's name, which do vex me mightily, that my name should be brought in question about such things, though I did not say much to him of my discontent, till I have spoke with my Lord Brunker about it. So he being gone, being to go to Oxford to-morrow, we to cards again late, and so broke up, I having great pleasure with my little girl, Mrs. Tooker. 19th. Up and to the office, where all the morning. At noon, by agreement, comes Hatcham Pepys to dine with me. I thought to have had him to Sir J. Minnes to a good venison pasty, with the rest of my fellows, being invited. But seeing much company, I went away with him, and had a good dinner at home. He did give me letters he hath wrote to my Lord and more about my Lord's money, to get it paid to my cousin, which I will make good use of. I made mighty much of him, but a sorry dull fellow he is, fit for nothing that is ingenious, nor is there a turd of kindness or service to be had from him. So I shall neglect him if I could get but him satisfied about this money, that I may be out of bonds for my Lord to him, to see that this fellow could desire me to help him to some employment, if it were but of 100 pounds per annum, when he is not worth less than, I believe, 20,000 pounds. He gone, I to Sir J. Minnes, and thence with my Lord Brunker on board the Besom to examine W. Howe again. who I find upon this trial one of much more wit and ingenuity in his answers than ever I expected, he being very cunning and discreet and well spoken in them. I said little to him, or concerning him, but Lord, to see how he writes to me a days, and styles me my honour, so much is a man subjected and dejected under afflictions, as to flatter me in that manner on this occasion. Back with my Lord to Sir J. Minnes, where I left him and the rest of a great deal of company, and so I to my office, where late writing letters, and then home to bed. 20th. Up and was trimmed, but not time enough to save my Lord Brunker's coach, or Sir J. Minnes's, and so was fain to walk to Lambeth on foot. But it was a very fine frosty walk, and great pleasure in it, but troublesome getting over the river for ice. I to the Duke of Albemarle, whither my brethren were all come, but I was not too late. There we sat in discourse upon our navy business an hour, and thence in my Lord Brunker's coach alone, he walking before, while I stayed a while talking with Sir G. Downing about the Act, in which he is horrid troublesome, to the Old Exchange. Thence I took Sir Ellis Layton to Captain Cox, where my Lord Brunker and Lady Williams dine, and we all mighty merry, but Sir Ellis Layton one of the best companions at a meal in the world. After dinner I to the Exchange, to see whether my pretty seamstress be come again or no, and I find she is. So I to her, saluted her over her counter in the open Exchange above, and mightily joyed to see her, poor pretty woman. I must confess I think her a great beauty. After laying out a little money there for 2 pair of thread stockings, cost 8 shillings, I to Lombard Street to see some business to-night there at the goldsmith's. Among others, paying in £1,258 to Viner, for my Lord Sandwich's use, upon Cox's account. I was called by my Lord Brunker in his coach with his mistress, and Mr. Cottle the lawyer, our acquaintance at Greenwich, and so home to Greenwich, and thence I to Mrs. Pennington, and had a supper from the King's Head for her, and there mighty merry and free as I used to be with her, and at last, late, I did pray her to undress herself into her nightgown, that I might see how to have her picture drawn carelessly, for she is mighty proud of that conceit, and I would walk without in the street till she had done. So I did walk forth, and whether I made too many turns or no in the dark, cold, frosty night, between the 2 walls up to the park gate, I know not, but she was gone to bed when I come again to the house, upon pretence of leaving some papers there, which I did on purpose by her consent. So I away home, and was there sat up for to be spoken with my young Mrs. Daniel, to pray me to speak for her husband to be a lieutenant. I had the opportunity here of kissing her again and again, and did answer that I would be very willing to do him any kindness, and so parted, and I to bed, exceedingly pleased in all my matters of money this month or 2, it having pleased God to bless me with several opportunities of good sums, and that I have them in effect all very well paid, or in my power to have. But 2 things trouble me. 1, the sickness is increased above 80 this week, though in my own parish not one has died, though 6 the last week. The other most of all, which is, that I have so complexed an account for these last 2 months for variety of layings out upon Tangier, occasions and variety of gettings, that I have not made even with myself now these 3 or 4 months, which do trouble me mightily, finding that I shall hardly ever come to understand them thoroughly again, as I used to do my accounts when I was at home. 21st. At the office all the morning. At noon all of us dined at Captain Cox at a good chine of beef, and other good meat, but being all frostbitten, was most of it unroast, but very merry, and a good dish of fowl we dressed ourselves. Mr. Evelyn there, in very good humour. All the afternoon till night pleasant, and then I took my leave of them, and to the office, where I wrote my letters, and away home, my head full of business, and some trouble for my letting my accounts go so far, that I have made an oath this night for the drinking no wine, etc., on such penalties, till I have passed my accounts and cleared all. Coming home and going to bed, the boy tells me his sister Daniel has provided me a supper of little birds killed by her husband, and I made her sup with me, and after supper were alone a great while, and I had the pleasure of her lips, she being a pretty woman, and one whom a great belly becomes as well as ever I saw any. She gone, I to bed. This day I was come to by Mrs. Burrows of Westminster, Lieutenant Burrows, lately dead, his wife, a most pretty woman, and my old acquaintance. I had a kiss or 2 of her, and a most modest woman she is. 22nd. Up betimes, and to my Lord Brunker, to consider the late instructions sent us for the method of our signing bills hereafter, and paying them. By and by agreement, come Sir J. Minnes and Sir W. Batten, and then to read them publicly and consider of putting them in execution. About this all the morning, and, it appearing necessary for the Controller to have another clerk, I recommended Pointer to him, which he accepts, and I by that means rid of one that I fear would not have been fit for my turn, though he writes very well. At noon comes Mr. Hill to town, and finds me out here, and brings Mr. Hoobland, who met him here. So I was compelled to leave my lord and his dinner and company, and with them to the Bear, and dined with them and their brothers, of which Hill had his, and the other two of his, and mighty merry and very fine company they are, and I glad to see them. After dinner I forced to take leave of them by being called upon by Mr. Andrews, I having sent for him, and by a fine gloss did bring him to desire tallies for what orders I have to pay him and his company for Tangier victuals, and I by that means cleared to myself 210 coming to me upon their 2 orders, which is also a noble addition to my late profits, which have been very considerable of late, but how great I know not till I come to cast up my accounts, which burdens my mind that it should be so backward. But I am resolved to settle to nothing till I have done it. He gone, I to my Lord Bronkers, and there spent the evening by my desire in seeing his lordship open to pieces and make up again his watch, thereby being taught what I never knew before. And it is a thing very well worth my having seen, and am mightily pleased and satisfied with it. So I sat talking with him till late at night, somewhat vexed at a snappish answer Madam Williams did give me to herself, upon my speaking a free word to her in mirth, calling her a mad jade. She answered, we were not so well acquainted yet. But I was more at a letter from my Lord Duke of Albemarle to-day, pressing us to continue our meetings for all Christmas, which, though everybody intended not to have done, yet I am concluded in it who intended nothing else. But I see it is necessary that I do make often visits to my Lord Duke, which nothing shall hinder after I have evened my accounts. And now the river is frozen, I know not how to get to him. Thence to my lodging, making up my journal for 8 or 9 days, and so my mind being eased of it, I to supper and to bed. The weather hath been frosty these 8 or 9 days, and so we hope for an abatement of the plague the next week, or else God have mercy upon us, for the plague will certainly continue the next year, if it do not. 23rd. At my office all the morning, and home to dinner, my head full of business, and there my wife finds me unexpectedly. But I not being at leisure to stay or talk with her, she went down by coach to Woolwich, thinking to fetch Mrs. Barbary to carry her to London to keep her Christmas with her, and I to the office. This day one comes to me with 4 great turkeys, as a present from Mr. Dean at Harwich, 3 of which my wife carried in the evening home with her to London in her coach, Mrs. Barbary not being to be got so suddenly, but will come to her the next week, and I at my office late, and then to my lodgings to bed. 24th, Sunday. Up betimes to my Lord Duke of Albemarle by water, and after some talk with him about business of the office with great content, and so back again and to dinner. My landlady and her daughters with me, and had mince pies, and very merry at a mischance her young son had, in tearing of his new coat, quite down the outside of his sleeve in the whole cloth, one of the strangest mishaps that ever I saw in my life. Then to church, and placed myself in the parson's pew under the pulpit, to hear Mrs. Chamberlain in the next pew sing, who is daughter to Sir James Bunch, of whom I have heard much, and indeed she sings very finely. And from church met with Sir W. Warren, and he and I walked together, talking about his and my businesses, getting of money as fairly as we can. And having set him part of his way home, I walked to my Lord Brunker, whom I heard was at Alderman Hooker's, hoping to see and salute Mrs. Lethulier, whom I did see in passing, but no opportunity of beginning acquaintance. But a very noble lady she is, however the silly alderman got her. Here we sat talking a great while, Sir Theo Biddulph and Mr. Vaughan, a son-in-law of Alderman Hooker's. Hence with my Lord Brunker home, and sat a little with him, and so home to bed. 25th, Christmas Day. To church in the morning, and there saw a wedding in the church, which I have not seen many a day, and the young people so merry one with another, and strange to see what delight we married people have to see these poor fools decoyed into our condition, every man and woman gazing and smiling at them. Here I saw again my beauty Lethulier. Thence to my Lord Brunker's by invitation, and dined there, and so home to look over and settle my papers, both of my accounts private, and those of Tangier, which I have let go so long that it were impossible for any soul, had I died, to understand them, or ever come to any good end in them. I hope God will never suffer me to come to that disorder again. 26th. Up into the office, where Sir J. Minnes and my Lord Brouncker and I met, to give our directions to the commanders of all the ships in the river, to bring in lists of their ships' companies, with entries, discharges, etc., all the last voyage, where young Seymour, among 20 that stood bare, stood with his hat on, a proud, saucy young man. Thence with them to Mr. Cuttle's, being invited, and dined nobly and neatly, with a very pretty house, and a fine turret at top, with winding stairs, and the finest prospect I know about all Greenwich, save the top of the hill, and yet in some respects better than that. Here I also saw some fine writing work and flourishing of Mr. Hoare, he one that I knew long ago, an acquaintance of Mr. Thomson's at Westminster, and that is this man's clerk. It is a story of several archbishops of Canterbury, engrossed in vellum, to hang up in Canterbury Cathedral in tables, in lieu of the old ones, which are almost worn out. Thence to the office a while, and so to Captain Cox, and there talked, and home to look over my papers, and so to bed. 27th. Up and with Cock by coach to London, there home to my wife, and angry about her desiring a maid yet, before the plague is quite over. It seems Mercer is troubled that she hath not one under her, but I will not venture my family by increasing it before it be safe. Thence about many businesses, particularly with Sir W. Warren on the Change, and he and I dined together and settled our Tangier matters, wherein I get above £200 presently. We dined together at the Pope's Head to do this, and thence to the goldsmith's, I to examine the state of my matters there too, and so with him to my house. But my wife was gone abroad to Mrs. Mercer's, so we took boat, and it being dark, and the thaw having broke the ice, but not carried it quite away, the boat did pass through so much of it all along, and that with a crackling and noise, that it made me fearful indeed. So I forced the watermen to land us on Redriff side, and so walked together till Sir W. Warren and I parted near his house, and thence I walked quite over the fields home by light of Link, one of my watermen carrying it, and I reading by the light of it, it being a very fine, clear, dry night. So to Captain Cox, and there sat and talked, especially with his counsellor, about his prize goods, that hath done him good turn, being of the company with Captain Fisher, his name Goddison. Here I supped, and so home to bed, with great content that the plague is decreased to 152, the whole being but 330. 28th. Up into the office, and thence with a great deal of business in my head, dined alone with Cock. So home alone, strictly about my accounts, wherein I made a good beginning, and so, after letters wrote by the post, to bed. 29th. Up betimes, and all day long within doors upon my accounts, public and private, and find the ill effect of letting them go so long without evening, that no soul could have ever understood them but myself, and I with much ado. But, however, my regularity in all I did and spent do help me, and I hope to find them well. Late at them, and to bed. 30th. Up into the office, at noon home to dinner, and all the afternoon to my accounts again, and there find myself, to my great joy, a great deal worth above £4,000, for which the Lord be praised, and is principally occasioned by my getting £500 of Cock for my profit in his bargains of prize goods, and from Mr. Gordon's making me a present of £500 more, when I paid him 8,000 for Tangier. So to my office to write letters, then to my accounts again, and so to bed, being in great ease of mind. 31st, Lord's Day. All the morning in my chamber, writing fair the state of my Tangier accounts, and so dined at home. In the afternoon to the Duke of Albemarle, and thence back again by water, and so to my chamber to finish the entry of my accounts, and to think of the business I am next to do, which is the stating my thoughts, and putting in order my collections about the business of purses, to see where the fault of our present constitution relating to them lies, and what to propose to mend it. And upon this late, and with my head full of this business, to bed. Thus ends this year, to my great joy, in this manner. I have raised my estate from £1,300 in this year to £4,400. I have got myself greater interest, I think, by my diligence, and my employments increased by that of treasurer for Tangier, and surveyor of the victuals. It is true we have gone through great melancholy because of the great plague, and I put to great charges by it, by keeping my family long at Woolwich, and myself and another part of my family, my clerks, at my charge at Greenwich, and a maid at London. But I hope the King will give us some satisfaction for that. But now the plague is abated almost to nothing, and I intending to get to London as fast as I can, my family, that is my wife and maids, having been there these 2 or 3 weeks. The Dutch war goes on very ill by reason of lack of money, having none to hope for, all being put into disorder by a new Act that is made as an experiment to bring credit to the Exchequer, for goods and money to be advanced upon the credit of that Act. I have never lived so merrily, besides that I never got so much, as I have done this plague time, by my Lord Brunkers and Captain Cox's good company, and the acquaintance of Mrs. Nip, Coleman, and her husband, and Mr. Lanier, and great store of dancings we have had at my cost, which I was willing to indulge myself and wife, at my lodgings. The great evil of this year, and the only one indeed, is the fall of my Lord of Sandwich, whose mistake about the prizes hath undone him, I believe, as to interest at court, though sent, for a little palliating it, ambassador into Spain, which he is now fitting himself for. But the Duke of Albemarle goes with the Prince to sea this next year, and my Lord very meanly spoken of, and indeed his miscarriage about the prize goods is not to be excused, to suffer a company of rogues to go away with 10 times as much as himself, and the blame of all to be deservedly laid upon him. My whole family have been well all this while, and all my friends I know of, saving my Aunt Bell, who is dead, and some children of my cousin Sarah's, of the plague, but many of such as I know very well, dead. Yet, to our great joy, the town fills apace, and shops begin to be open again. Pray God continue the plague's decrease, for that keeps the court away from the place of business, and so all goes to rack as to public matters, they at this distance not thinking of it. End of December. End of the Diary of Samuel Pepys, 1665, by Samuel Pepys.